Well, here we are. It's a snowy day in Minnesota, and we're doing a live video because I figured a lot of people are home. Hopefully, everybody's home. And what better way to spend the time on a snowy, gray, dismal afternoon in Minnesota than to read William Shakespeare's great tragedy, Romeo there. So, hopefully, you have a copy of Romeo and Juliet. If you don't, that's fine. Just listen along, and we'll talk about it, I guess, as we go. The idea being that we can get through maybe an act today, one act, and see what happens after that. So, I've taught this play for several years, and I've taught it in various different ways, some which take root better than others. I know that one way of teaching it is to refer to the scholastic debate of the 13th century, which, in my humble estimation, is more than just my idea fix. The idea that I fixate on. It's more something I think that Shakespeare was himself fixated on as late as the 1600s. That it was an idea that had not gone away in Europe. So I tend to think that he embodied this idea in numerous different plays. But one thing for sure is that this play, which is touted normally as a romance, is not a romance. It's not a romance. So let's get that out of the way right off the bat. If you're watching this, I wish I could give credit for college credits or whatever, or high school credits. I can't. But I can at least give some insight, and maybe if you are dealing with homeschooling kids today and you want some content, here's some content, right? What better thing to do than to study Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare? But one thing, just to get this out of the way, it's not a romance. I don't know if Shakespeare wrote romances per se. I think the closest thing that he did that was a romance was probably something like, I don't know, As You Like It, for instance, or Much Ado About Nothing, perhaps. But not this play. Not this play. It's a great play. It's one of his greater plays. But it's not a romance. So, am I clear on that? Is that clear? Did I make myself clear on that? It's not a romance. I'm not going to read it as a romance. So, there. What I will do is point out some things along the way which might give insight to this play. And if you've never read it before, then I'm going to try not to give away endings. So I'm going to try not to give spoiler alerts. If you have read it before, maybe this will be a new way for you to look at this play, to see something about this play that you hadn't seen before. First off, I like to point out the setting and names of characters, because names in a work, in Shakespeare especially, have great meaning. So, first off is that we have characters like Romeo and Juliet, Capulet, Montague, Mercutio, Benvolio. Their names all mean something. So Benvolio, for instance, is goodwill, and Mercutio is the Roman version of Hermes. He's Mercury. Yeah, Mercury was the guide of souls to the underworld, but he was also the messenger of the gods, and he was the guide for pilgrims who were journeying to a holy site of some kind. Romeo, that fits perfectly, because Romeo is his name means a pilgrim to Rome. So when we look at that character, he's temporarily stopped here in the city of Verona. Though he's grown up there, he's been born there and he lives there. But I guess because of his namesake, his real end place is Rome. And I suppose we could say that in Shakespeare's mind, that's a Catholic vision, that's a Catholic image. I don't know. It certainly is an image of a character that should be on pilgrimage and gets waylaid by the young lady who stops him on the way. Romeo is Romeo Montague, and Montague means the Mount of Fevers, or the mountain of ague, of fevers, Fever Mountain. So it's kind of like the place of the skull, as far as I can tell. So you've got the place of the skull, Romeo, who's the pilgrim, and then you've got Juliet, Juliet is Juliet Capulet. Her last name Capulet means a little hat, little head. And Juliet is another version of Julius, or of Zeus, of Jupiter. So Julius is a form of Jupiter. Juliet is a form of Jupiter. And I can't help but think that the names are intentionally chosen here. Then you've got Paris, which I find a really interesting choice of name here. Paris is, of course, the seat of learning there in Europe. The University of Paris was one of the major universities, and it was also the seat of the scholastic debate in the 13th century. Paris then seeded the university there at Oxford in England, which became the second major university there in Europe. So the name Paris, who is the prince who is betrothed to Juliet eventually, the name Paris itself has connotations. It has baggage to it. Now, connotation versus denotation, just really quickly for those who are not familiar with the terms. Connotation is the idea that is carried along by proxy with a word. It's like the baggage that the word carries along with it. Denotation is what the word explicitly means or indicates. So when we have a name like Paris, Paris denotes this guy specifically who's betrothed to Juliet, but the connotation is that it refers back to the city of Paris. It has echoes of whatever that entails. So I'm going to some degree, read this play with you and try to get through Act 1. And I'm going to read it not as a romance, but rather as, on the one hand, a tragedy of rashness and ungoverned desire, ungoverned love, ungoverned lust, but also as an embodiment of the scholastic debate of the 13th century. As to the first thing, I think that the best indicator of Shakespeare's idea in this play comes in one of his sonnets, Sonnet 129, which is, I don't remember the whole thing off the top of my head, so you have to look it up. But 129 says, "An expense of spirit and a waste of shame is lust in action." And he goes on to talk about how lust in action, unbridled lust, destroys people, wrecks people. Really, that kind of gives the framework, I think, for this play here. The Romeo and Juliet is sort of an incarnation of the idea of lust in action, which is the Sonnet 129. This play was written, as my Dover edition here that I'm using says, it was written sometime in the mid-1590s. So late in the 16th century, early part of the 17th century here. And it's set in the city of Verona. And that's important because Verona was itself one of these up-and-coming merchant cities. It had developed its trade very recently in the 1500s. And in the setting of the play, its trade was based primarily on trade and mercantilism. It was also a site along the pilgrim route from England down to Rome. So it serves a dual purpose, Verona does. Now, if we read the play as an embodiment of the scholastic debate, we need to have some idea of what that debate is. So even before I start this play with you, I want to give at least some indicator of what I'm talking about when I mean the scholastic debate. Essentially, in the 13th century, there was a debate in the major schools of Europe, Paris being the most prominent one, between the most learned men, the scholastics of the time. And it involved men such as Thomas Aquinas, for instance, and Abelard, and later Duns Scotus and others. And the debate was, as I understand it, was between, it was about the nature of our language and the nature of our ideas, and how our ideas are connected or not connected to a reality beyond this world. What do ideas indicate? So on the one hand, you had a group that was called the nominalists, and on another hand, you had the group that was called the realists. The nominalists held that our words and ideas are constructs of our mind in order that we can function in the world around us. That way we don't end up, riding our hat to work, or thinking that a nail is food, because we indicate those things by words that tell something about what the thing is in the physical world. But for the nominalist, there was no connection between, or very little connection between, the word itself and a metaphysical reality beyond this world. Rather, words were constructs of the human mind that were designed to help us function in the world, the physical world, but there is no metaphysical realm. For the realist saw or held that the words themselves indicated a metaphysical reality, a reality that was part of a great plan, a grand plan that emanated from a central being, a central figure, which we refer to as God. God is the beginning of this great plan called the Logos, and the Logos then takes more individuated forms in the physical world. And for the realist, our words therefore have great power because they indicate something of the reality of the Logos. For the nominalist, our words only have power because they can persuade other people, because they can alter the way that people function in the world. So for both nominalist and realist, words have power, but they have different reasons for their power. And the nominalist holds that there is no metaphysical world that it's connected to, and words are changeable. Words are, and ideas are merely constructs that we have in order to function in the world. For the realist, the words have power, but they have power because they're connected to a Logos that's beyond us, a Logos that is emanating from the mind of God himself. If one were to hold the realist position, one might say your faith, although it's a suffering in this world, is nevertheless a pilgrimage towards that great glory which is God, that we end up moving towards seeing the source of the stars and the other planetary bodies, as Dante says in his great work of the Divine Comedy. Our pilgrimage, therefore, is a pilgrimage to the very heart or center of religion for the realist. And the realist, therefore, is like a pilgrim to Rome. See? For the nominalist, our success or our happiness is dependent upon how we live in this world. And how we live in this world is really of our own free will, our own free choosing, because we choose how to deal with words and how to deal with other people. It's a construct. Now, this is not to say that one is wrong and one is right. Simply, this was the debate that was so heated in the 13th century that in, I think, 1277, I think it was, Archbishop Tempier of Paris shut down the debate. He said, no more are we going to have this debate. And these ideas are condemned. They're not going to be taught anywhere in our universities. And Oxford followed suit and said those same ideas are not going to be taught in Oxford. And lo and behold, a large number of those ideas were ideas that the nominalists held. So you can see that the debate was threatening. It was something which was intense and intensely followed by the powers that be. Many of the teachers, the scholastics, who then taught nominalism or who professed nominalism, fled from Paris to Germany, and they founded colleges there in Germany. One of those colleges that was eventually founded, I think, in the early 1500s, so about 200 years after this debate had been shut down by Archbishop Tempier, was Wittenberg College. And of the first or second graduating class of Wittenberg College was Martin Luther. And as we know, he was the fellow who sparked off the Reformation in Europe. So you see that the Reformation itself has its roots in the scholastic debate. Shakespeare, writing in the 1590s and the 1600s, would have inherited this ongoing debate, which really had not died. It had simply been split, had been like cesarean section between the nominalists and realists. He probably still was wrestling with this idea, as many of the intellectuals, many of the artists were still wrestling with this idea. And that's why I think making a claim that this work of Romeo and Juliet is a sort of embodiment or incarnation of that, it holds some water. That there is some validity to say we can read this work with light of the scholastic debate. Now, that being said, that's a long-winded way of getting into the work, but it gives some background to what I think Shakespeare is doing. If you had questions about this, feel free to type in, and I'll see if I can answer you. This is all such a new experience for me, but hopefully it's going to add some value to you. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to launch in and go ahead and read as we go, and read from the beginning of the prologue here in my text, my Dover text, and we'll try and read through Act 1, at least the first couple scenes, so we get a sense of what the play is about. So Shakespeare writes, he begins with a prologue. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do, with their death, bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage, the which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. We start off here with the prologue. Immediately we're into two houses. So we have a duality immediately going on. And the two houses of Montague and Capulet, who fight with one another, have been fighting for some time, it seems. One could say that they represent the scholastic sides of the debate. One could say that they represent sun and moon. Perhaps we could say that they simply represent a feminine and masculine side to human nature. All sorts of things. Shakespeare doesn't come down and say this definitely is representing this. He just says they're two households. And he goes on to say that from the fatal loins of these two foes, there's a pair of star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet. And that's a phrase that's frequently misconstrued. Star-crossed lovers really means, we're talking astrology here, and Shakespeare's audience would have certainly been familiar with astrology. And if you are star-crossed with someone else, it means that your zodiacal sign was contrary to their zodiacal sign, and that you were going to run amiss of them. So if, for instance, if you met somebody whose zodiacal sign was crossed with yours, it would be extremely unwise to start up a relationship with them, because it was doomed to failure. And even the prologue here says that they sprang from fatal loins. A paradox there, by the way, fatal and loins being contrary to one another. But that these two have misadventured, piteous overthrows, and that they die in the end. So at the very start of the play, the prologue comes out and says, we're going to look at two lovers, and they're going to die. And this is like, well, sort of give away the entire play. Spoiler alert at the very beginning, right? But Shakespeare's audience would have been familiar with Romeo and Juliet. And that's why I think the play is one of those remarkable plays, because his audience knew full well that this was what was going to happen. And the art is not in a sort of surprise, they die thing. It's in how do we get to that death? What is the artwork that Shakespeare employs in order to get us to that point where these two star-crossed lovers bite the bullet at the end? That's why the play is so great, because it takes a well-known story to his audience and it changes it, it alters it, it embodies something in the play itself. But it is interesting to note that here at the beginning we also have a specific structure of poetry to start us off. one could ask, why does he write a prologue at the start of this play? First off, it's a very valid question. He does a prologue also with Henry V, and I think one other play, I'm not sure, but this it's a very rare thing for him to have a prologue or a chorus that comes on and tells us something about the play. Normally, when he does have a chorus, it elevates the story to almost a classical level. He would use a chorus, like in Henry V, in order to create the character of Henry as this noble, virtuous seeming, almost classical figure. And here I think he's doing a similar thing. It's a similar reason why he brings up classical names like Mercutio, for instance, in this play. These are names that came from Roman mythology. And the prologue or chorus is a Roman, Greek addition to drama. The Greeks had a chorus that would interact with the main characters. Romans adopted the same thing. Chorus also sets a frame for the story. So when we're watching this, when we're reading something which is already colored by what the chorus tells us to think. And from the very start, the chorus comes out and says, these kids are going to die. And it's sad. And it's tragic. But it will fix everything. So their death sort of is the reason why the families get together. And yet that itself is called into question during the course of the play. So here we have this chorus. And the other thing to note is that the chorus is speaking in a specific poetic style. First off, he's using iambic pentameter. And if you're not familiar with what this is, iambic means the organization of beats in a line. And pentameter means the number of beats in the line. So penta, 5 beats, means we have 5 feet, 2 beats per foot. And that, bump, 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 5. Okay, so pentameter. Iambic means that the emphasis is on the second beat. So bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum. That's iambic pentameter. But we notice also in this opening chorus that the opening chorus is rhyming in such a way that you have 4 lines that rhyme together: dignity, seen, mutiny, unclean. And then you have another 4: foes, life, overthrows, strife. And then you have another 4: love, rage, remove, stage, and then attend and mend. If you are unfamiliar with this structure, this is essentially called a sonnet. It's a form of poetry that was made popular by a fellow by the name of Petrarch. And the sonnet is a structural pattern that's normally used for serious matters, for romance. And Shakespeare has at least, I think it's 2, maybe 3 sonnets in the course of this play that he puts forth. So we'll look for those as we go, because they indicate something about what Shakespeare's trying to do of elevating the material. All right. Oh, as a word of thumb, I will try to refrain from my long-winded commentary until at least the end of a scene. And then at the end of the scene, I'll make comments and the like. So here we go. Act 1, Scene 1. Romeo and Juliet. Verona, a public place. Enter Samson and Gregory of the house of Capulet with swords and bucklers. Gregory, on my word, will not carry coals. No, for then we should be colliers. I mean, an we be in collar, will draw. Aye, while you live, draw your neck out of the collar. I strike quickly, being moved. But thou art not quickly moved to strike. A dog of the house of Montague moves me. To move is to stir, and to be valiant is to stand. Therefore, if thou art moved, thou run'st away. A dog of that house shall move me to stand. I will take the wall of any man, or maid of Montague's. That shows thee a weak slave, for the weakest goes to the wall. 'Tis true, and therefore women, being the weaker vessels, are ever thrust to the wall. Therefore I will push Montague's men from the wall and thrust his maids to the wall. The quarrel is between our masters and us their men. 'Tis all one. I will show myself a tyrant. When I have fought with the men, I will be civil with the maids. I will cut off their heads. The heads of the maids? Aye, the heads of the maids. or their maidenheads, take it in what sense thou wilt. They must take it in sense that feel it. Me they shall feel while I am able to stand, and 'tis known I am a pretty piece of flesh. 'Tis well thou art not fish. If thou hadst been poor John. Draw thy tool. Here comes two of the house of Montagues. Enter Abraham and Balthazar. My naked weapon is out. I will back thee. How now, turn thou back and run. Fear me not. No, marry, I fear thee. Let us take the law of our sides. Let them begin. I will frown as I pass by, and let them take it as they list. Nay, as they dare, I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them, if they bear it. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? Is the law of our side if I say aye? No. No, sir. I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir. Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, sir? No, sir. But if you do, sir, I am for you. I serve as good a man as you. No, better? Well, sir. Enter Benvolio. Say better. Here comes one of my master's kinsmen. Yes, better, sir. You lie. Draw, if you be men. Gregory, remember thy swashing blow. And they fight. Part, you fools. Put up your swords. You know not what you do. Enter Tybalt. What art thou drawn among these heartless hinds? Turn thee, Benvolio, look upon thy death. I do but keep the peace. Put up thy sword, or manage it to part these men with me. What? Drawn and talk of peace, I hate the word. As I hate hell, all Montagues, and thee, have at thee, coward. And they fight. Enter several of both houses who join the fray. Then enter citizens and peace officers with clubs. Clubs! Bills and partisans strike, beat them down. Down with the Capulets! Down with the Montagues! Enter old Capulet, Miss Gown, and Lady Capulet. What noise is this? Give me my long sword. Ho! A crutch, a crutch. Why call you for a sword? My sword, I say. Old Montague is come, and flourishes his blade in spite of me. Enter old Montague and Lady Montague. Thou villain Capulet! Hold me not, let me go. Thou shalt not stir 1 foot to seek a foe. Enter Prince Escalus with his train. Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor-stained steel, will they not hear? What ho, you men, you beasts, that quench the fire of your pernicious rage, with purple fountains issuing from your veins? On pain of torture, from those bloody hands, throw your mistempered weapons to the ground and hear the sentence of your moved prince. 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word by thee, old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens, cast by their grave beseeming ornaments, to wield old partisans, in hands as old, cankered with peace, to part your cankered hate. If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. For this time all the rest depart away. You, Capulet, shall go along with me. And Montague, come you this afternoon, to know our farther pleasure in this case. To old Freetown, our common judgment place. Once more, on pain of death, all men depart. Exeunt all but Montague, Lady Montague, and Benvolio. Who set this ancient quarrel new approach? Speak, nephew, were you by when it began? Here were the servants of your adversary, and yours close fighting ere I did approach. I drew to part them. In the instant came the fiery Tybalt, with his sword prepared, which as he breathed defiance to my ears he swung about his head and cut the winds, who, nothing hurt withal, hissed him in scorn. While we were interchanging thrusts and blows, came more and more, and fought on part and part till the prince came, who parted either part. Oh, where is Romeo? Saw you him today? Right glad I am he was not at this fray.
Madam, an hour before the worshipped sun peered forth the golden window of the east, a troubled mind drave me to walk abroad, where underneath the grove of sycamore that westward rooteth from the city's side, so early walking did I see your son. Towards him I made, but he was ware of me, and stole into the covert of the wood. I, measuring his affections by my own, which then most sought where most might not be found, being one too many, by my weary self, pursued my humour, not pursuing his, and gladly shunned who gladly fled from me.
Many a morning hath he there been seen, with tears augmenting the fresh morning's dew, adding to clouds more clouds with his deep sighs. But also soon as the old cheering sun should in the farthest east begin to draw the shady curtains from Aurora's bed, away from light steals home my heavy son, and private in his chamber pens himself, shuts up his windows, locks fair daylight out, and makes himself an artificial night. Black and portentous must this humour prove, unless good counsel may the cause remove.
My noble uncle, do you know the cause?
I neither know it nor can learn of him.
Have you importuned him by any means?
Both by myself and many other friends. But he his own affection's counsellor is to himself. I will not say how true, but to himself, so secret and so close, so far from sounding and discovery, as is the bud bit with an envious worm, ere he can spread his sweet leaves to the air, or dedicate his beauty to the sun. Could we but learn from whence his sorrows grow, we would as willingly give cure as know.
Enter Romeo. See where he comes. So please you step aside. I'll know his grievance, or be much denied.
I would thou wert so happy by thy stay to hear true shrift. Come, madam, let's away.
Exeunt Montague and Lady Montague. Good morrow, cousin. Is the day so young? But news struck 9. Ay, me sad hours seem long. Was that my father that went hence so fast? It was. What sadness lengthens Romeo's hours?
Not having that which, having, makes them short.
In love?
Out.
Of love?
Out of her favour, where I am in love.
Alas, that love so gentle in his view should be so tyrannous and rough in proof.
Alas, that love whose view is muffled still should without eyes see pathways to his will.
Where shall we dine?
Oh, me, what fray was here? Yet, tell me not, for I have heard it all.
He has much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. That is not what it is. This love feel I, that feel no love in this. Dost thou not laugh? No, cuz I rather weep. Good heart, at what? At thy good heart's oppression.
Why, such is love's transgression. Griefs of mine own lie heavy in my breast,
which thou wilt propagate, to have it pressed with more of thine. This love that thou hast shown doth add more grief to too much of mine own. Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed to see nourished with lovers' tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall, and a preserving sweet. Farewell, my coz. Soft, I will go along, and if you leave me so, you do me wrong.
Tut, I have lost myself. I am not here. This is not Romeo. He's some other where.
Tell me in sadness, who is that you love?
What shall I groan and tell thee?
Groan, I know, but sadly tell me who. Bid his sick man in sadness make his will. Ah, word ill urged to one that is so ill. In sadness, cousin, I do love a woman. I aim so near one I supposed you loved. A right good markman. And she's fair, I love. A right fair mark, fair cuz, as soon as tit. Well, in that hit you miss. She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow. She hath Dian's wit, and in strong proof of chastity well armed. From love's weak, childish bow she lives unharmed. She will not stay the siege of loving terms, nor bide the encounter of assailing eyes, nor ope her lap to saint-seducing gold. Oh, she's rich in beauty, only poor that, when she dies, with beauty dies her store. Then she hath sworn that she will still live chaste? She hath, and in that sparing makes huge waste. For beauty, starved with her severity, cuts beauty off from all posterity. She is too fair, too wise, wisely too fair, to merit bliss by making me despair. She hath forsworn to love, and in that vow do I live dead, that live to tell it now. Be ruled by me. Forget to think of her. Oh, teach me how I should forget to think. By giving liberty unto thine eyes. Examine other beauties. 'Tis the way to call hers exquisite, in question more. These happy masks that kiss fair ladies' brows, being black, put us in mind they hide the fair. He that is struck and blind cannot forget the precious treasure of his eyesight lost. Show me a mistress that is passing fair. What doth her beauty serve, but as a note where I may read who passed that passing fair? Farewell, thou canst not teach me to forget. I'll pay that doctrine, or else die in debt. Exeunt. So what do you make of that? That's that opening scene there. And there's a lot packed into it after that prologue. I mean, you start off with the two warring houses fighting with one another like cats and dogs. I mean, you have a romance here where the romance starts in violence, in a civil war going on. And a civil war which actually has no basis in anything important, it seems like. I mean, the fact that the two characters at the beginning, Samson and Gregory, decide that they're going to make their opponents angry. You know, the Montagues will come along and no matter what happens, I'm going to make them angry. Is betrayed by the fact that they two are fighting with themselves. Samson and Gregory are already fighting with one another, teasing one another. And then along come Abraham and Balthazar, and Samson and Gregory immediately engage in insulting them. Do you bite your thumb, sir? You know, biting your thumb is this Italian insult, the figure of biting your thumb. And it's akin to our flipping somebody the bird, you know, here in America. And it would be insulting. And so they go to insult these guys, and they're kind of cowardly about it from the very start. So here you have a romance that's based in violence, and violence which doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't seem to have any real basis for itself at all. And then immediately you have, after the fight occurs, even Capulet and Montague, who should be the adults in the room, end up trying to fight with one another, old geezers as they are. You know, one of them tries to go out, and the wife says, you know, you need a crutch rather than a sword, right? And they're eventually parted by the prince, who has to come in and beat the heads of everybody and separate them in order to maintain order. So we're already in a setting which is really very odd for a romance to take place. And it's one of the reasons why I think that when we're talking about Romeo and Juliet as a romance, it isn't. It's not a romance. It has romantic elements to it, but it's not a romance. It's a story about conflict, it seems to me, and about antagonism, and sometimes unfounded antagonism between these houses of Montague and Capulet. And then Benvolio has this exchange with Montague, Lord Montague, which I find fascinating. Because before we ever see Romeo, you know, he's not in the fight, he's not in the midst of the fray. He's a lover, not a fighter, right?
And he's described by Benvolio as being out under a tree somewhere, that he's pining under a tree. And I don't want to make Romeo out to be some, I don't know, disreputable character, or say that I dislike the character at all. I don't think I do. I think he's rather a pitiable character. But in many ways, he has elements which are very similar to Shakespeare's other character, Hamlet. Because at the very start of this play, here he is under a tree, and he's described as being really melancholy, brooding, not knowing where he's going. Here's this line where Benvolio asks Montague, do you know the cause of any of this? And Montague responds that he's been under this tree many a morning, right, with tears augmenting the fresh morning's dew. Away from the light he steals home and privately shuts himself in his chamber, shuts up his windows and locks fair daylight out and makes himself an artificial night. So he's like some mooning teenager. He just hides from everybody else. Nobody understands me. It's like some goth kid or something. But that's pejorative. It's a put down of the Romeo character. I think it's more complex than that. Like Hamlet, he's brooding over something, I think, which is beyond his capacity to understand what it is that's troubling him. And like Hamlet, he's definitely a goth character, wears black, hangs out in the dark, etc., etc., etc. And one can say, just buck up, little Romeo, and be happy, life is good. But he's more complex than that, I think. I think his brooding is more complex than this. And when Benvolio asks, what's the cause of all that brooding? Montague says, I don't know. I can't find out. Nobody can find out. And again, you can attribute this to simply, teenage angst. What's wrong with you kids these days? And kids just, you can't understand me. You were never young, blah, blah, blah. But I think, again, his angst comes out to some degree in this exchange with Benvolio. Benvolio says, what sadness lengthens your hours? What is it that makes you so sad? And he answers in a sort of a peroration, a circular way. Not having that which having makes them short. In other words, I don't have the thing which, if I had that thing, would make my hours short, would make me happy. And we find out that it's love. He loves this girl, and the girl is being chaste and not giving herself to him sexually. But let's not just put it down and to that only. Let's not just attribute that only, okay? Let's say there's more to it than that. Otherwise, we cheapen the character, right? We make it just a kid who can't get no satisfaction, like Mick Jagger or something like that. And it's not just I can't get no satisfaction. It's that he is longing for something to fill up this void that he feels inside him. He longs to find something which would make meaning out of his life. And he thinks that it's this girl. And this girl is refusing to consummate a romance with him, which could be a nice distraction were they to have a romance together. It's a frequent mistake, I think, among young people, that romance will somehow assuage the longing and the loneliness and the sorrow which is inherent in the human condition. Romeo seems to be tapping into this essential element of being alive as a human. That as humans at heart, our existence is lonely. It is filled with angst. It's filled with sorrow. And we don't quite know why. And so what do? We fill it up with distractions. For our age, the distractions are video games and music and clubbing and going to see movies and being on the internet. These are distractions for us to fill up the time, because otherwise we have to face this emptiness, and that's very difficult to face. So I think Romeo is experiencing that sense, and he's thinking that if he were to just get this girl, all would be well. La 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 la, kiss the girl, And I think that he then subscribes to this feeling, emotions that he just dimly understands, so that when he sees the brawl that occurs in the streets, we get a glimpse of the fact that this angst is greater than just not having a girl.
He says here, here's much to do with hate,
but more with love. Very odd line. Much to do with hate, but more with love. Is it that our human love itself results in violence and hatred? Our human love results in killing one another? He says a series of contradictions after this, paradoxical phrases. Brawling love, loving hate, anything of nothing first create. It's a great, great line. Oh, anything of nothing first create. Right? This is something which is created out of nothingness. Now, if we were to take this to a metaphysical level for a minute, that's a really powerful statement because it gets back to the whole issue of scholastic debate. What exists because why? Where did it come from? Does it come out of nothing? Is our world a creation ex nihilo? Is what we see around us going back to a plethora of being in God? Or is what we see around us going back to essentially a nothingness at its heart? Or maybe he's just talking about the bodies that he sees around him, the violence that he sees around him, that this specifically is something that comes out of nothingness. It's possible. He goes on to have a series of other paradoxical statements that he makes here. He says, heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms. Which again, an interesting phrase, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms. Now, the debate of the scholastic debate has a lot to do with forms, about what the forms are, and that's a Platonic idea of this realm of forms in the Logos itself. That these are the fundamental shapes or images out of which all the different diverse shapes that we see around us emerge. So it is possible that Shakespeare is making a reference here, that what he sees around us is misshapen chaos, but that it emerges out of well-seeming forms. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. That is not what it is. So what he sees around him, he's trying to give a name to it, trying to pin it on, what is this thing I'm seeing around me? It's this and this and this. No, it's none of that stuff. And then he says, this love feel I that feel no love in this. So I feel this intense love, but I don't feel the love in around me at all. That love doesn't seem to find any focus to it. Benvolio laughs, but actually he's weeping. He says, I weep for you, and I weep at your heart's oppression. And then Romeo has this great little thing. Love is a smoke raised with the fumes of sighs. Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs. Being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes. Being vexed, a sea nourished with lovers' tears. What is it else? A madness, most discreet, a choking gall and a preserving sweet. Now, is that love? Shakespeare also says, love is not love that alters when it alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. It is an ever-fixed point that looks upon tempests and is not shaken. He has characters in other plays, like Benedict, for instance, who expresses a form of love in Much Ado About Nothing, which is much more constant. So Shakespeare seems to have definite opinions about love. But here, I think the character Romeo, who's still a young guy, is trying to deal with what in the hell's going on with me? Why do I feel this terrible emptiness and anxiety and angst? And is this love that I'm feeling? Is it? Do I simply write it off as love, or is it something more profound? He wants to focus it on a woman who would solve all his problems. But as it turns out, that's not going to happen. In fact, quite the opposite will happen. One way or the other, I think one can say that in Act 1, Scene 1, you get a sense that Romeo is a pilgrim trying to find the heart of the matter, trying to find the essential element of human life. He's on a road to find out the heart of the mystery, like Hamlet seemed to do. And on his way, on his travels to Rome, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, he gets waylaid by a woman who he thinks is the woman that is going to fix everything. And by the way, for those of you who have not read this before, it's not the woman he's speaking about in Act 1, Scene 1. In Act 1, Scene 1, he talks about this woman who will not yield herself up to him. A woman who is not hit with Cupid's arrow, who has Diana's wit, and in chastity is well armed. That's a different woman. It's not Juliet. As a matter of fact, it turns out, if you really want to see the soap opera side of this, it's actually Juliet's cousin. And this cousin, in these tight-knit families, this cousin probably was known to Juliet, and she might have known something of the romance that was going on, or attempted romance that was going on, as might Tybalt, one of the other characters. So Romeo, who's trying to get this cousin to be his paramour, is not unknown to the Capulet family, to Juliet and the others. But one way or the other, his first locus of love is not Juliet. It's this girl, who, by the way, her name is Rosalind. Rosalind. And he's pining over Rosalind. The name Rosalind means the rose. And if we wanted to look at this again as an allegorical play, the rose, or the mystical rose, is Mary. That's a metaphor that was used for Mary, the Mother of God. So is it that Shakespeare is embodying here a pilgrim seeking for the heart of the matter in the mystical rose that remains chaste and apart from him? And then he gets waylaid by Juliet? Can we read it that way? Certainly, if we look at an earlier work like Dante's work of the Divine Comedy, in the Divine Comedy, the mystical rose is that heavenly course, that heavenly body, which Dante finally sees at the end of his travels. Mary is at the seat of that, right next to God, but it's essentially the heavenly structure, the mystical rose. So one could make the claim, I think, that Romeo's original pursuit of meaning, his original pursuit of something to assuage the loneliness and sorrow that everybody feels, is trying to find an answer in the mystical rose, in Rosalind, in the beauty of a woman. Something of the medieval romance going on here too. Okay, but essentially it's a pilgrim seeking the heart of the mystery, and yet he doesn't have a name for it. He doesn't know how to express it completely. So that he says at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, he says, "Teach me how I should forget to think." Thought itself is leading me towards this pursuit. "And show me a mistress that is passing fair. What doth her beauty serve but as a note where I may read who passed that passing fair?" Right? In other words, show me somebody who's beautiful. Anybody, any other woman. Show me another woman who's beautiful. And I will have problems even with her, because even in her face, her beauty is a reflection of this beauty, this glory that I can't get at. It's not a question of finding the right girl for Romeo. It's not like some girl's going to come along and solve everything. It's that he's longing for something which he doesn't quite know what it is. But that the beauty of young women is itself a reflection of that beauty. It's not the beauty. It's a reflection of that beauty. And like Rosalind, that beauty remains chaste and apart from us. never completing us, never fulfilling us, Romeo says.
So at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, we can say he's in a state very much like, it's sort of like Hamlet, right? As if Hamlet had a girlfriend here in Verona. It's very similar to that. And that's the type of young man that then is going to get in contact with Juliet. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to read Scene 2 with you and go over a little bit about that. We can get into something more of the character of Juliet, find out what she's like as well. So until then, I think that's sufficient for the day. If you had questions or anything that you wanted to address further, feel free to type in. I'll check it and respond when I can. So thanks very much. I'm going to finish up here live broadcast. Stay safe, stay healthy. We live in interesting times. God be with you all.